Hi everyone, my name is Tom Paschalis, and it is my pleasure to present, albeit virtually, at BigSurv20 research that we've done at the Center for Social Media and Politics on path to fake, who goes, and how did they get there. So let's get started. Fake. Probably most of you are familiar with fake news, one way or another. This topic has been receiving a lot of attention recently in the past few years, particularly in the wake of the 2016 US election. However, the topic is certainly not confined to the US. Before going deeper into research, it is helpful to give some operational definitions of what we mean by fake news. There is a certain consensus among the researchers that fake news websites are those websites that appear similar to mainstream news, but at the same time lack proper editorial norms and processes, and thus can subject their readers to misinformation. There is also a growing concern about the role that social media play in the spread of this kind of misinformation. And in this research, we're trying to address these concerns. So in particular, we are looking at three research questions: who is more likely to go to unreliable websites with fake news, for whom news websites with dubious information constitute a larger share of their media diet, and which internet platforms are more likely to be a path to unreliable and credible news websites. Before going deeper into the results, here is some short preview. So we find that older people and those more conservative are more likely to visit websites with fake news, and on average, they constitute a bigger share of their online media diet. We also find that people are more likely to go to unreliable news websites as opposed to credible from Facebook, Twitter, email, and other news websites. And at the same time, people are less likely to transition there from search engines, indirect browsing. So one important qualifying statement talking about social media platforms is that we find that Facebook only accounts for around 15% of transitions, which is quite low, and Twitter for even fewer, for around 5%. So what we believe at the general level is happening is that as opposed to being forwarded to dubious websites from social media, consumption of fake news appears to be an organic part of news diet for some people. So what is the data that we are using? We have web tracking survey data collected prior to 2018 US midterm election, which this data collection exercise was conducted by YouGov between mid-September 2018 and the day of the election. It contains around 6.5 million observations of almost 1,000 users' browser activity. We do have both desktop and mobile. However, our coverage of desktop web browsing histories is much better. With mobile, mobile only constitutes around 8% of the total visits. Collecting web tracking data is non-trivial, so we make sure to use only the highest quality data and exclude those collected through VPN and proxy. So we only include activity tracked using web extension. What we also use to, in order to look at credible and unreliable news websites, we're using the list compiled by NewsGuard, which has a very good coverage both at the national and local level for the US. We do exclude some news aggregators such as AOL, MSN, and Yahoo, because they might be hard to distinguish between visits to Yahoo as a news aggregator and Yahoo as a search engine. So capturing path that takes people to certain websites and certainly not trivial. What researchers have been doing in the past is looking at the website, whether a given website, say Facebook, was present within certain window, and this window can be a certain number of prior websites or a certain number of minutes before the website which is of interest, such as a news media website in our case. So one way to look at it is whether Facebook occurred within the 5 previous websites, or whether Facebook was one of the websites amongst amongst those visited within the past 5 minutes, let's say. In this study, we're making a somewhat simplifying assumption, and that we treat all any preceding URL as a proxy for the source of transition to the website, which means we do not necessarily look at the referrals, or we don't necessarily look at we are not sure whether we cannot be sure whether people clicked, but we can be sure that this was the last website before people transitioned to our website of interest, right? We also remove all the internal transitions because what we're mostly interested is the source of point of entry to news websites, and in particular fake news websites, as opposed to going within browsing the website itself. We also focus on hard news and remove all soft news using keywords. So these are the top most visited website by the number of visits in our data set. You can note some outliers, such as Drudge Report, which received more than 20,000 visits, and certain sports website, 12hub.com. So one way to deal with that is obviously to look not at the sheer number of visits, but at the number of respondents who went to different websites. And here you probably find somewhat more familiar picture with such credible news second-level domains as CNN.com and New York Times or Washington Post being in the top 3, and unreliable news domains, Daily Kos, TMZ.com, and Daily Wire. And we, in our analysis, we focus at the second level domain. So going to the first research question, who goes to fake news website? It seems that only very conservative users have a higher proportion of unreliable news sources in their diet. So if you look at panel A of the plot below, we only find significant difference between very conservative and other ideological groups, but not so much between, for instance, conservative and other ideological groups. We also find that 45 to 65 and 65 plus are more likely to visit dubious websites, and all age groups have a higher share of them than 18 to 29. So the younger cohort has the minimum amount of unreliable news in their media diet. So we can also look at that in the regression framework and account for other socio-demographic characteristics such as education and income, and the results essentially remain the same regarding age and ideological group. We don't find anything significant in terms of education or income. So how do people get to unreliable news websites? So this plot shows the distribution of proportions of visits to fake news websites with all internal and transitions included, and also soft news visits excluded. So what we see here is that ignoring the column that we sort of left undefined and call it other, mainstream news surprisingly looks like the main source of transition to fake news websites, with Facebook following after, although albeit with a much lower proportion. So we get about like 25, almost 25% of transitions from mainstream news, and only about 15% of transitions from Facebook. So here it is important to note that first of all, we don't say that there is people go on mainstream news websites such as New York Times and visit and click something and go to fake news website. What we rather believe what's happening is that people have both certain mainstream news websites and fake news websites, say, bookmarked, and then they go back and forth between those two. And particularly when looking at the types of mainstream news websites that serve as a springboard to getting to fake news websites. We are looking at those on the fringe, such as Breitbart or Fox News, ones we would expect, as opposed to New York Times or something on the left end of the spectrum. For comparison, it is useful to look how people to credible news, and what strikes potentially the most here is the level of concentration. So using the same relatively simple scheme, we're able to classify only about 50% of transitions to credible news, while we were able to classify, as you can see from the previous plot, almost 75% of transitions to fake news websites. And most people get to those through search engines or from other mainstream news websites. And the same results hold once we do that in the Bayesian regression framework, as shown here. So once we combine the two, so the demographic groups and the path to news websites, we get a picture like this one. So in here we're looking at the marginals of transitions to unreliable, conditional, ongoing to the news. So restricting all of our transitions to news only, be they credible or unreliable. And the way to rate this table is to say, so for instance, for 1829s, they are way, so 10% of the time when they are in their inbox and their email, they transition to fake news websites. At the same time, 90% of time, they transition to fake news websites, to mainstream news websites. So, for instance, for 65 pluses, the same path. So through email, 32% of time it leads them to fake news, and 68% of time it leads them to mainstream news. Which is important to say that many people do appear to be subscribing to and clicking through, so going from newsletter of Daily Caller and clicking through and going to to credible to unreliable news websites. So the same goes for the mainstream news websites percentage. Here, we get only 3% of transitions to unreliable news websites for age being 18 to 29, and we get 49% of transitions from mainstream media to once mainstream media follows by another news media. 41% of time, 65 plus end up on a dubious website. Again, these are the pure marginals. We can look at them in the regression framework. So we fit the multi-level hierarchical Bayesian hierarchical model with varying intercept for each of the respondent and varying slope given the age of the respondent, and then we run this simulation 1,000 times and plot the density and the median probability of transition, which somewhat attenuates our the results that we get purely from the marginals. But the same picture holds here with mainstream news. So here the probability is lower than 40% before. It's about 25, but this is still significantly higher once you look at the credible intervals, then transitioning to fake news from credible news for 18 to 29. Okay, so our results, overall results, social media account for fewer transitions to unreliable news sites than is often believed. People are least likely to go to these websites from search engines and direct browsing. For some, in particular older people, dubious websites appear to be an organic part of the online media diet. Thank you very much for your attention, and we're looking forward to your questions and comments during in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.